Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Bavaria. I'm Ollie Barrett and these are the headlines. Here in Bavaria, the G7 agrees to explore imposing a ban on transporting Russian oil that has been sold above a certain price. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he will meet US President Joe Biden on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Madrid for talks about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China's foreign minister will travel to Myanmar this weekend for a regional meeting in what will be Beijing's highest profile visit since the military seized power there. 10 people have died after a building collapses in India's financial capital, Mumbai. 23 people are rescued as operations to save those trapped under debris continue. Last year's runner-up Matteo Berrettini pulls out of Wimbledon just hours before his scheduled first-round clash after testing positive for COVID-19. One of the most brazen terrorist attacks from the world's biggest terror organisation. That's how Ukraine's president is describing the bombing of a crowded mall in eastern Ukraine. At least 18 people were killed in the strike and over 25 hospitalised with serious injuries. Over 1,000 people were at the shopping complex when it was attacked by Russian forces.
Today's Russian strike on a shopping center in Kremenchuk is one of the most brazen terrorist acts in European history. A peaceful city, an ordinary shopping center. Inside, women, children, ordinary civilians. Before the announcement of the air alert, there were about 1,000 people inside. Fortunately, as far as we know at this time, many people managed to get out. They managed to get out. But there were still people inside, workers, some visitors. Only completely heartless terrorists who should have no place on earth can strike missiles at such an object. And this is not a mistaken hit by missiles. This is a calculated Russian strike at this shopping center.
І це не помилкове попадання ракет, це прорахований російський удар.
I was walking home from work and I just got to Amstor Mall, where the ramp is. When there was an explosion, the windows were blown away. I fell down and about 10 or 15 minutes later, there was another explosion. I realized I needed to get away. I ran away from the epicenter with all of my strength. It was terrifying.
The Russian Defense Ministry claims it fired at a weapons depot in the city of Kremenchuk, and it was a subsequent explosion that led to the fire at the mall. The G7's called the attack abominable and a war crime. The leaders at talks here in Germany vowed that Russian President Vladimir Putin, along with those who carried out the attack, would be held accountable. A Russian strike also hit a school in the Kharkiv region on Monday. Well, here at the G7 in Bavaria in Germany, Russia's war in Ukraine has very much topped the agenda. G7 leaders have agreed to work on a possible price cap for Russian oil. That would be designed to cut Moscow's energy revenue, which is funding its war in Ukraine. Wrapping up the summit, the leaders of the world's 7 wealthiest democracies sent a strong signal of long-term commitment to Ukraine's future, while promising that Russia will pay a higher price for its invasion.
As the G7, we agree on the assessment that this concerns very long-term changes that will affect international relations for a very, very long time. This is why it is clear the ties to Russia cannot return to what they were before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Because when the situation changes, we also need to change. Everyone very much knows this.
The leaders are announcing steps to boost global food security. They're pledging $5 billion to help resolve food supply problems sparked by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The G7 has also condemned China for distorting international trade practices. Well, for more, we're being joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, who's in Munich. Siddhant, what do you take away from this summit as it wraps up? What have been the key themes and conclusions here?
Well, great to speak with you, Oli. The big outcomes in terms of this summit was and has been the action taken by the West when it comes to supporting Ukraine and, of course, statements condemning Russia, something that was on expected lines. But we have seen, while statements have come out, what support the Ukrainian government gets on ground is something that is to be seen. Remember, the Ukrainian President Zelensky had a conversation lasting for almost 2 hours yesterday, in which his key focus was more defense support. The Americans are working on a package, but it is yet to be seen how much support in terms of defense the West is going to give to Ukraine. But largely a very long communique, almost 28 pages long communique has been issued. It mentions Russia almost 32 times and largely imposes sanctions in terms of use of Russian gold, as you talked about the cap being put on Russian crude, but also mentions China, because China is another big worry. One interesting line that has come across in the communique is any attempt by China to change the situation on the ground unilaterally. Now that resonates strongly back home in India, given that China has been indulging in actions at the line of actual control. We saw just 2 years ago the Galwan incident in which India lost 20 of its soldiers. So that is something that is a takeaway for India. But largely there was focus area on climate, on energy. In fact, Afghanistan is also mentioned, while it might not make it into headlines given the Russia-Ukraine crisis is dominating. The G7 has called on Taliban to give and support the women's rights, something we have seen from the West for a long time. But will Taliban change its course is something that is yet to be seen.
And Siddhant, talk to me about that proposed price cap on Russian oil. It seems to have changed shape several times over the course of the last few days here in Germany. Are we ever likely to see it actually in action?
Well, that's the big question. The West has been announcing a lot of things. Will it be put on the ground, something that pinches Russia? Yes, Russia is not very happy with the imposition of sanctions, especially against President Putin. But what Russia has been doing while these caps have been announced, more details are awaited on these caps. Russia has been looking at countries like India and China for its import of its crude. We have seen an increase of discounted crude oil, something that has made the West not very happy about it. So Russia has been able to bypass the sanctions, and while the West has been announcing sanctions, things on the ground are very different. The aggression continues. In fact, while the G7 meeting continues, it is over now, but on the first day we saw attacks in Kiev, then we saw attack at the shopping mall, which has been described as the worst terror attack on European soil since World War II by the G7 leaders. The the Russian president, it looks like, is not deterred, or he is not willing to change his course despite the voices coming out. Perhaps a more brave face will be required from the West to change Putin's current stance. We might see it in Madrid.
And Siddhant, just briefly, you're in Munich, where Narendra Modi was staying while he was here for that outreach day of the G7 summit with those invited democracies. How do you think that went from a G7 perspective, but also from an Indian perspective? Was that day considered successful?
Well, for India, it is a success that India has been invited at G7. This was Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's third time that he is at a G7 meeting invited by the president. He's now reached UAE, the second leg of his two-day foreign, two-country visit. But largely, it's a success for India in terms of able to showcase what it wants to get out from the West. We know that when it comes to the G7 leaders, yesterday we saw the visuals. We're very happy to meet Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Those informal visuals spoke a lot, especially the US President Biden and the French President Macron meeting the Indian Prime Minister. But it also helps the G7 because it has been criticized for being a limited group in terms of the Western membership. So the presence of countries like India and other countries who were invited, the Global South, shows that G7 is willing to work with other countries to come out with a solution from various issues, not just Russia-Ukraine war, but also climate change and commodity prices. While these countries, including India, have stayed away from criticizing Russia, they got a lot of positive outcomes in terms of energy initiatives being taken forward, and of course President Biden's infrastructure partnership, which is going to benefit these countries as well.
OK, Siddhant, thank you. Safe travels. That's Siddhant Sibal joining me live from Munich as the G7 summit wraps up here in Bavaria. Well, with the G7 summit over, leaders are en route to Madrid for a 3-day NATO conference. You can hear the helicopters buzzing around ahead here as officials and leaders make their way there and make their way to other destinations. The Western military alliance will focus on the ongoing war in Eastern Europe, as we've seen that focus here in Bavaria. Ahead of the NATO summit, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has held a phone call with NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg. He has emphasized the importance, as he sees it, of a powerful missile defense system for Ukraine. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says the alliance aims to send a message of deterrence and unity in the face of Russian aggression.
I think that from the first moment, both NATO heterogeneous and all the allies, we have been very measured in our interventions, especially not to escalate this conflict. What is clear is that we have to convey a dissuasive message to the Russian Federation and to Putin that obviously Article 5 can be activated at a time when any of the allied countries, some of them, suffer. This threat is very direct. I am thinking, for example, of the Baltic republics, where we have to transmit a message of deterrence, that we are ready to defend every centimeter of allied territory.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine has forced historically neutral nations, Finland and Sweden, towards NATO. The two countries have applied to be part of the Western military alliance, but there's been resistance from Turkey.
One of the issues raised by Turkey concerns Sweden's response to Turkey's request for extraditions. These matters are handled swiftly and carefully by our legal system in accordance with European Convention on Extradition. Sweden is not and will not be a safe haven for terrorism. The relevant authorities work intensively in order to expel persons who could be a security threat. And there are a substantial number of cases which are currently processed.
Before heading to the summit, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that he had spoken enough and now wants to see results from those two countries.
We will do whatever is necessary in line with the rights and interests of our country. We will express their hypocrisy, especially towards terrorist organizations like PKK and YPG, to the faces of our counterparts with documents, information and images. We will also state that it will not be possible to expect a different attitude from Turkey before this picture changes.
Among the other issues expected to come up during the conference is Spain's policy towards Africa. Madrid is lobbying for support in addressing the country's migrant crisis.
They were trying to reach Europe, and some paid with their lives. The deaths of at least 23 people as they tried to cross into Spain's North African enclave Melilla on Friday is a grim reminder of the perils of migration that also include dangerous sea crossings. However, Spain is hoping a new strategy will help keep migrants from danger, says Foreign Minister José Manuel Álvarez.
No podemos permitir que el Mediterráneo.
We cannot allow the Mediterranean, through Libya, Morocco and other countries, the Atlantic, the route between Africa and the Canary Islands, to become enormous tombs,
Y Canarias sean
where every year thousands of human beings die when all they aspire to is a better life.
que lo único que aspiran es a una vida mejor.
Parts of Africa are facing a hunger crisis exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, which has disrupted grain exports. Moscow denies responsibility for the food crisis, blaming Western sanctions. Two diplomatic sources said Spain, its southern neighbours and EU officials are increasingly worried the situation will trigger chaotic migration from the Sahel and sub-Saharan regions. They say numbers are already on the rise. Even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which it calls a special military operation, Spain's Socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez had revived a policy mothballed by previous governments, according to two officials close to him. It centres on working with African partners to contain migration and to tackle root causes such as instability and climate change.
Eso es lo que nosotros,
We are looking for good relations with all the neighbours around us
países de nuestro entorno,
and jointly managing phenomena that no one, not even the most powerful state on the planet, can deal with on its own.
puede hacer frente por sí solo.
The two diplomatic sources said Spain will use a NATO summit in Madrid this week to press its case and is likely to ask for increased intelligence sharing, including on issues related to migration. It also wants to secure a commitment for better policies on hybrid threats, including the possibility that irregular migration is used as a political pressure tactic by hostile actors. The government has also sent a bill to Parliament that would mark a significant expansion of existing funding for migration control to 8 African countries. However, human rights groups and migration advocates say Spain's quest to outsource enforcement has put vulnerable people in the hands of security forces in countries with a history of abuses and heavy-handed policing. The deaths on Friday, which were protested in Madrid at the weekend, came after clashes with Moroccan security forces when around 2,000 people tried to cross into Melilla. A Moroccan official said security personnel had not used undue force. The Moroccan Association for Human Rights and Spanish migration charity Walking Borders said on Saturday the incident was, quote, a tragic symbol of European policies of externalising the borders of the EU. Sanchez's office did not immediately reply to a request for comment.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is set to lay out her plans later for holding a new Scottish independence referendum. This after she published a paper aimed at making a fresh case for independence for Scotland. Sturgeon claims she has a democratic mandate for another referendum. The First Minister says the UK government in London is in no position to lecture other countries on democratic norms if its intent is to crush its own democracy. Number 10 says it's not the time for another referendum. The last was held in 2014 and saw independence rejected. Sturgeon wants the UK government to transfer powers to the Scottish Parliament, which would allow the vote to legally take place. Members of the UK Parliament have voted in favour of a bill that would give ministers power to change parts of the Brexit deal. 295 votes to 221, Parliament gave an initial green light to scrapping parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, despite a backlash from the European Union.
We are taking this action to uphold the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which has brought peace and political stability to Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Protocol is undermining the functioning of the agreement and of power sharing. It has created fractures between East and West. It has diverted trade and meant people in Northern Ireland are being treated differently from people in Great Britain. That this bill is both necessary and legal, and the government has published a legal statement setting it out.
The controversial bill passed amid warnings from opposition leaders. Former Prime Minister Theresa May, a Conservative, said that the bill breaches, in her view, international law.
In thinking about this bill, I actually started off by asking myself three questions. First of all, do I consider this to be legal under international law? Second, will it achieve its aims? And third, does it at least maintain the standing of the United Kingdom in the eyes of the world? And my answer to all three of those questions is no.
The Northern Ireland Protocol is part of the 2019 Brexit deal signed between the EU and the UK. Northern Ireland remained in the single market of the European Union effectively to avoid a hard border with neighbouring Ireland. The UK insists it's not functioning as intended and must be changed. Sri Lanka is reeling under an unprecedented economic crisis. It's leading to long queues for fuel.
In the Sri Lankan capital Colombo, schools have closed their doors and public employees been asked to work from home. The island nation, home to 22 million people, is battling its worst economic crisis in 7 decades. Foreign exchange reserves are at an historic low, and the country is struggling to pay for essential imports of food, medicine, and most critically, fuel. At gas stations, troops are handing out tokens to those waiting in rapidly growing queues. 49-year-old motorist K. Shamugarajan is one of those who has received a token that is meant to hold his place in line for when fuel becomes available.
I've been here since midnight on Friday. When we got here, they'd stopped pumping petrol. I don't know whether I will get petrol or not. For the moment, they've given me a token. Although I got a token, I don't know if I'll receive petrol or if they are trying to fool us. The money I had to pump petrol is now gone. Somebody has gone away and says he will bring me some money. Only when he returns can I pump petrol.
But with no fresh shipments due, it is not immediately clear how far the government can stretch its fuel reserves. On Sunday, the government announced the country was down to just 15,000 tonnes of petrol and diesel to keep essential services running in the coming days. Despite vast queues at gas stations, public transport, power generation and medical services will get priority in fuel distribution. Ports and airports will also receive some rations. Sri Lanka's Minister of Power and Energy, Kanchana Vijayasekara, has warned the situation may get worse.
I believe that until the financial situation is managed, we will have to face various challenges. Sometimes we might be able to do away with petrol queues completely. Sometimes there will be occasions where we cannot stop the queues. I believe that we cannot obtain $550 to $600 million in the coming months. We will definitely have to reduce our consumption to $350 million.
A team from the International Monetary Fund is visiting Sri Lanka to hold talks on a $3 billion bailout package. Although the Indian Ocean nation is hoping to reach a staff-level agreement before the visit ends on Thursday, that is unlikely to unlock any immediate funds.
England have completed a first clean sweep over New Zealand in a 3-test series since 2004. That's after winning the Headingley Test by 7 wickets. Johnny Bairstow produced another of his brutal assaults to leave the world champions in disarray. An England win was expected on the final day of the series, but rain and a wet outfield delayed play by more than 2 hours. England needed 113 more for the win, and Bairstow ensured the target was reached with ease. Bairstow has benefited from the aggressive approach wanted by the new coach Brendan McCullum and the new captain Ben Stokes, and raced to his half-century of 28 balls, the second fastest of all time for England. He finished with a mighty 6 as he ended unbeaten on 71 off just 44 balls, with Joe Root unbeaten on 85. England needed just 15.2 overs to knock down the target, and Root was named Player of the Series, with Jack Leach Player of the Match for his 10-wicket haul. Bairstow missed out despite having scored 394 runs at an average of 78. England's run rate of 4.54 is the best for any team with a minimum of 5 innings batted in a series, and they've chased down a target of 275 plus in each of the 3 matches.
That is very special, and the new leader, Ben Stokes, played terrific.
Now, if you were watching our coverage of the G7 in Cornwall in England a year ago, you'll have seen a taste test of sorts of a local delicacy, the Cornish pasty. I was roundly mocked, by the way, for the way I ate that pasty from the outside in, although some tell me that actually I got it right, and in historical times Cornish miners would have ate it in exactly that fashion to keep their dirty fingers away from the middle of the pasty. Well, now that we're in Bavaria, the local equivalent, I suppose, is the pretzel, invented, we think, in something like the 7th century. There is a big debate about whether it was here in Germany or in Switzerland or in Italy. The Germans, and the Bavarians in particular, certainly claim it. There you go. That is a Busse pretzel, I think is the right pronunciation. It's got butter in it, and we can compare it to the pasty. I better leave it there, but my verdict is that the Cornish pasty is better than the German pretzel. The English weather seems to be better than the German weather as well, by the way. See you soon.
There are many other... this is right, Arab.